Thank you for joining us today. We're in Gallery A at the Turchin Center for the Visual Arts, and we're showcasing the work of Elizabeth M. Claffey. Her installation is titled Matrilinear. Elizabeth is an assistant professor of photography at Indiana University in Bloomington. She is a 2019-2020 research fellow at the Kinsey Institute for Research in Sex, Gender, and Reproduction. She was an honors graduate of Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana, and has an MFA in studio art from the Texas Women's University, where she also earned a graduate certificate in women's studies. In 2012, she was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship, which she used to support her documentary work in Eastern Europe. She spent a year photographing in Albania. Elizabeth's creative work focuses on the way personal and familiar narratives are shaped by interactions with both domestic and institutional structures and spaces. Her work has been recognized by PDN Magazine, Center Santa Fe, the Eddie Adams Workshops, Strange Fire Collective, Don't Take Pictures Magazine, the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Dallas Morning News, and Western Exhibitions in Chicago, to name just a few. Elizabeth's work is specifically aimed at starting conversations within community. She uses visual art as a catalyst for storytelling and to express the knowledge of people often under-recognized within the public sphere. Elizabeth's projects examine cultural and social context, engage in community dialogue, and encourage critical inquiry. Matrilineal is designed to challenge the way that one defines knowledge, which has ultimately been shaped by the patriarchy. How knowledge is defined and who is allowed to acquire it have always been an exercise of power by those in control. So the theories, wisdom, and experience of others, women, people of color, religious minorities, the LGBT community, people of varying abilities, who are older, those with low incomes, all of the people who are marginalized by the COVID-19 pandemic that we are currently experiencing, they are often unacknowledged as being of consequence or having value within the public realm. Elizabeth's images are meant to express alternative forms of knowledge development and collection. Matrilineal aims to create space for the deep knowledge base that women can develop through interaction with home space and with each other. She says, "The women in my family have a long-standing practice of sharing and passing down objects and clothing." And you can see the clothing that is in Elizabeth's family in these images. "There are so many things that my mother, my sister, and I swap often. I am always hesitant to discard things, and at some point ended up with several of my grandmother's old undershirts. They range from girlish shirts with flower patterns to baggier silk V-necks that wouldn't itch her skin as she grew older. Perhaps one of the most meaningful to me is the last one she wore before her death, which still had her family surname scrawled into the headline." And I'm quoting Elizabeth here. "My mother grew up during a time when clothing was precious, often handmade, and something that you mended until completely threadbare. This perspective was passed down to my sister and to me, and we keep our clothes until they fall off." And then I photograph them. So you'll see in some of Elizabeth's images, there are needles and threads where she talks about, makes reference through the physical object to her family history of mending clothes until she photographs them, because she doesn't throw anything away. Elizabeth's installation started with early images that were the undershirts that belonged to her grandmother, and then she transformed them with more items of clothing. Initially, the items were straightforward documentation, but then she worked with more material. And if you look closely at this matrilineal number 13, you'll see the item of a man's shirt, but tucked into the sleeve is another photograph. And she says that I'm interested in not only in the physical and emotional work women do within kinship structures, but also for the time and the space in which stories are passed down. There's this sacred space, not so much now, but historically, where relationship building was through domestic work, childcare, cooking, sewing, washing dishes, folding laundry. And she says she's not interested in implying that doing housework is fun, but that the gathering and the working and the attention that women paid to each other and through those shared mundane tasks is what built their relationships. So I'd like to share now Elizabeth's statement with you as we walk through the gallery. Matrilinear is an ongoing series that addresses embodied memory and its relationship to personal, familiar, and cultural identity. In mainstream Western culture, public forms of power are often passed down through patriarchal lines of heritage, along with dominant historical narratives that can socially condition peoples and shape identities. However, women have often interrupted this power and conditioning through the traditions of storytelling and object sharing. These images examine family folklore, ritual, and objects passed down through generations of women. The photographs often reveal the physical remnants of a body long gone, including stains, tears, and loose thread from clothing that was kept close to the body for comfort and for protection. The stitching and/or the photographic representations are both a visualization and an expression of stories shared as family lore. These interruptions also represent the deep influence of one's familiar past on the personal identity and perceptions of the body. The second suite in this series, Matrilinear 2, which is the work that you see here in these oval frames, expands to include found objects. My exploration of these garments reveal pockets full of tissues. So the images that you see here are crumpled up tissues and handkerchiefs. There are endless amounts of Kleenex that have been long used and often washed within the clothing. While these pieces of disposable cloth carry no value or specific story, I struggle to let them go as they were once held close to my mother's body. And the act of finding them embodies a memory, a ritual, and a premonition of my future self. By expressing domestic rituals and objects to explore their meanings within public context, this work aims to interrupt and transform normative cultural narratives. Through varying perspectives and translation, the practices and keepsakes that construct familiar stories become basic to a more inclusive collective memory and a global story of the past. Women play many complex roles within the structure of kinship: daughter, sister, cousin, mother, aunt, grandmother. These roles can be fluid and at times overlap. Matrilinear aims to create space for the deep knowledge base that women can develop through interaction with home space and each other. The series also draws upon the vernacular of an archive to imply the critical nature of women's experience within the greater context of history. We're looking at this image here of a pair of a little child shorts, and this is titled Matrilinear number 7. Elizabeth had this to say about this piece. I held these small shorts and remembered my own childhood, the scraped and bruised knees. The small flower patterns that you can see was a reminder of the constant expectation to be feminine or to be tame, a near impossible task for many young girls who desire an active or even aggressive physical experience in their youth. Simultaneously, I thought of my oldest daughter, Margaret. Her bruised knees reveal so much about who she is, the risks she takes, and the small details of her daily life, as well as being a physical manifestation of how she is like her mother. In this instance, the thread, which you see here in the image, became the broken or scraped skin of those once little knees. At times, the stories being expressed in these images are more about patterns of experience than a specific incident. Familial knowledge can be an empowering force in the face of physical uncertainty, aging, or just trying to better understand one's physical and emotional construct. We are DNA and lived experience. These are both passed down through generations. The stories are personal evolutions that can act as a foundation for understanding and self-acceptance. What I think is really so wonderful about Elizabeth's photographs in this installation is that they are life-sized. Viewers have the opportunity to experience the haunting images both as a memory of something familiar and as a memory of the person who might have worn the clothing. We can all recall similar pieces from our own past and our own family histories, and I think in this way the images become both personal to the artist but also universal. Thank you.